Hello again, everyone. I'm Richard Weil, and I'm the Principal and CEO of National Restaurant Consultants, and we welcome you in again to the NRC Helpful Moment number 70, a big milestone, our 70th video that we've done. And once again, we're welcoming in Mr. Brian Devine, President of Top Line Management, our co-branding partner with Cafe Fuel. Brian, always great to have you, and thank you again for all you do for the And today our featured speaker is our first guest from Wyoming in our group, and it shouldn't be our only guest from Wyoming, but it's our first one from Wyoming. Mr. Mark Dorr, who's the principal of his own CPA and accounting firm in Gillette, Wyoming, and offices in Cheyenne, the capital of Wyoming. And Mark is up in Gillette, which is a very thriving community up in the north central part of Wyoming. And Mark and I actually happened to meet at a forum on forensic accounting about a year ago, and we've been networking ever since. And Mark and his company have been doing a lot of work with the PPP. I consider him to be an expert in his field. Mark, what's the new pieces going on with PPP loan forgiveness that many of the food service and hospitality restaurants and businesses have PPP loan? Can you help provide a little bit updates for the crowd and the folks that are listening in?
Well, we can give a little bit of information out. Probably the most important thing for everybody to remember is that the PPP program changes on seemingly a daily, if not an hourly basis. So before we get ready to do this today, I did some checking to see what kind of new changes we have. Our firm's kind of unique in that we have dealt with people with PPP program all the way from California to North Carolina, and dealt with banks in several states and that sort of thing. So I checked with one of the banks here in Wyoming this morning to see if they had any direction on the forgiveness stuff. And they had just gotten something from the Wyoming office of the SBA, which is pretty interesting. And I want to read it to you because it's very specific. And this is what it says. SBA has not yet issued a procedural notice or similar guidance for how lenders should submit PPP loan forgiveness requests to the SBA. So bottom line is that nobody knows nothing, okay? Now, what they do go on to say in this, it's a little bit interesting that is not something that we've heard before, is that they're suggesting that the bank should be talking to anybody who's considering forgiveness because they're thinking there's going to be guidance coming soon, and they're going to be able to send out some sort of procedural notice on it. And then they suggest that banks double check with the borrowers who are thinking about submitting loan forgiveness to make sure that there are no circumstances under which they might wish they kept their loans open longer because unforeseen opportunities may emerge, including what they're calling a Prioritized Paycheck Protection Program, P4 Act. So what they're implying in this is that they think that there's a possibility that there's going to be amendments to the SBA program that will allow additional funding, but that those funds may only be available if you have an existing loan open. So in the past, I'm not sure how many of your folks have had experience with this, but if you filed for the first PPP and there were issues that went on, you could actually amend it and get additional borrowings from it. But you had to do that before your bank filed a Form 1502, which is how they got compensated from the SBA. Mm-hmm. And in the different banks we dealt with, we found that was really a complicated scenario, and some banks dealt with it a lot better than other ones. So the first thing I would do is tell people to be aware of this, that the forgiveness thing, even if you're in a position you can do it now, you want to be careful about whether you go ahead. And that's brand new as of today of what they're talking about. The other things that are interesting about this, I guess, that I think everybody's going to want to know is that the last week they came out with yet a new improved version of what's happening. And there are two different methods that you can get loan forgiveness. One of them is an easy version of it. But I wanted to read to everyone what from the SBA is the loan review procedure. And this is what the SBA is telling the banks. Lenders are expected to perform a good faith review in a reasonable time of the borrower's calculations and supporting documents concerning amounts eligible for loan forgiveness. So everyone needs to understand that the key to this is you submit the loan forgiveness information to your bank, and the bank's going to be who decides whether you get the forgiveness. And in what I just read, they're talking about a reasonable type of review by the bank. Then they give a little bit more information, and they say, for example, minimum review of calculations based on payroll report by a recognized third-party payroll processor would be reasonable. I have to stop and think about that. What does that mean? Then they go on to say, if payroll costs are not documented by such a recognized source, more extensive review would be appropriate. Well, what I would tell everybody is, if you don't have a good relationship with your banker, you need to get one, because the bank's going to be the ones that are making the choices of what goes on and what's required to be submitted and how they're going to go through the application process. Myself and other members of our firm have sat through several webinars that have been presented by the real so-called experts, okay? When Richard uses that term about me, you keep it lightly. Remember, we're out here in the back 40. We're the country bumpkins, so we may have done a few of these, but I hate for anybody to think that I think I'm touting myself as being the greatest thing in the world. We have learned in the actual loans that there's a huge difference in how each bank is looking at it. We had one specific question that we were dealing with, and we had clients who were dealing with banks in different states. So I asked the question of 2 different banks in 2 different states. Each of them had a contact with the SBA in their state, and each one of them got a written response back from the SBA on the question, and the SBA gave opposing answers in the 2 different states. So what we're hearing out of the webinars is a lot of the people are saying, what you got to keep in mind is this is being invented on the roll, and this is what's hopeful about it. Keep in mind that when you submit your forgiveness, the bank has 60 days to remit back to you to decide what it is. And then following that, there's another 90-day period that the SBA has to approve it and remit the funds to the bank. Now, the other important issue is I can go through the information that you may or may not have to submit with the application. I don't know how much detail of that you want to hear, but you need to keep all of these records for 6 years. And the thing on it that I think is most important is, if you fall into the category, which I'm guessing almost every restaurant in this country did, where they had a closure due to some sort of health considerations, either at the state, local, or national level, you have to keep documentation for 6 years as to what that was, okay? So that's going to be an important issue to make sure you have that. Some of the other little things in here that I thought might be kind of interesting for folks to know if they haven't seen it already is with the easy form, which is supposed to have been the big improvement. There were 40 US senators who complained a week ago Monday that it was terrible that you had a situation where it was a 1-page application, but they had this almost impossible form to fill out in order to get the debt forgiven. And they asked that the SBA provide them with a 1-page form. Well, 2 days later, they came back with an easy form that's 3 pages long, but it's better than what it was. And to fall into these categories, and this could be important because there are 3 categories you get into that you can fill out the easy form. The first one is if you don't have employees. So it's going to be a pretty small restaurant that doesn't have any employees. The second one is if you did not reduce salaries or hourly wages by more than 25% and did not reduce employees. That's going to be probably pretty difficult for most restaurants to be in that kind of a situation. But the third one is if you did not reduce salaries or hourly wages by more than 25% and were unable to operate during the covered period at the same level of business activity due to compliance with requirements established or guidance issued between the dates by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Directors of Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration related to the maintenance of standards, blah, 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 about COVID. So as I'm looking at that, I think there's a pretty good chance that there's some restaurants that could fall into that category.
You think a lot of
the real big difference between the two is if you get the simple form, you pretty much just got to deal with the issues of how you spent your money. If you don't have the simple form done, then you have to deal with the FTE, the full-time equivalents for your employees. And if you've got very many employees, that becomes a big problem. We've got one client who has 3 parts to the business in one location. And the restaurant and bar at that location were basically closed, other than maybe some carryout at some point in time. But the third part, he was required to keep open by federal mandate as being, a necessary thing that was there. So he's going to end up having to be into this full-blown exercise. And then we've got to decide all of these FTEs and try to figure out which employee is related to what element of the business and how do you document it. Which brings us full circle back to that issue of why you want to be friends with your banker. Because the question is, how much time is a banker going to want to do looking through this and trying to prove all that information? So it's going to be important to talk to the banker to know what the bankers are expecting on the front end, understanding that as of 10 o'clock Mountain Time today, the SBA here was sending out this notice stating that they don't have any rules to follow. So the banks are still sitting back and waiting for it. And of course, when they start coming, they're going to be overrun with all of those forgiveness applications. So does that kind of give you a ballpark of what you want to hear?
That's exactly what we wanted, Mark. It's great information. I think really the takeaway here, it's somewhat of a working process with the SBA and the banking community. Experts, and I will say that experts like Mark are watching this and reading this on a daily, sometimes an hourly basis. Use your professionals, because if you need brain surgery, you go to a brain surgeon. If you need this help with the PPP and the tracking and the forgiveness, you need to be talking to a professional, to your CPA, to your bookkeepers who are well in the know, or find someone who is. Contact National Restaurant Consultants, Mark's firm. They do work all over the country. We would be very happy to refer people on. We're not CPAs, we're not attorneys, but we are a great resource to help people. So Mark Dorr, that was outstanding. Brian, if you got anything else you want to add to that?
Real quick. And thank you, Mark, for all that great information. And I'm going to just go back to something that you said really early on, which was nobody knows nothing. and I want to make sure that everyone out there listening, that you and your restaurant are never in that position. And so, because what I wanted to talk about today was just communication, and don't ever let your customers feel like they don't know and you don't know what's going on and what you should be doing and how everything works. So communicate it like crazy. Put it on your website, put it everywhere, put it in your stores, put it on social media. And if you feel like you're overdoing it, you're still probably not doing it enough. So do it some more. And that's really what I wanted to cover today.
So Mark,
if I can't, before I go, Richard, I wanted to ask you a question, because all those folks in Denver tell me there's nothing about the restaurant business you don't know. So Carol and I were in a restaurant the other day, and a gentleman came in and he came up to the bar and he asked if he could get a Hawaiian punch. And the bartender told him that he'd have to go stand in line. And the guy looked around and left the restaurant, and I was hoping you could tell me why he left.
Hawaiian punch, baby.
He couldn't find the punchline.
Couldn't find the punchline. There you go.
A bad dad joke in honor of Father's Day.
I like it. I like it a lot. And so really, for today's helpful moment, it is about making sure, if you want that loan forgiveness, and there shouldn't be really anybody who doesn't, keep that loan open, as the other message I heard. If you can, there might be an opportunity there. And then make sure you are talking to your banker with the persons who you got your loan through. Maybe it was a third party, but be talking to that banker and be talking to your bookkeeper or your professional CPA and get the right information, because this thing's fluid. Mark Dorr, Brian Devine, thank you as always. That's it for today for our helpful moment. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye for now.
Bye.